One of the cool things I like to add to websites is adding a text shadow to main headings, just to make it stand out a little bit. And it's a big common thing that you probably will see, and especially like if you're looking at magazines and if you look at their titles, they probably do add a little shadow. Sometimes you don't have to add a shadow, but again, like in this case, like with PowerPoint, there's no need to add a text shadow to CSS text shadows because the black text is really standing out. What I usually do find is that sometimes when I have a lighter shade background with a darker color, I like to offset a shadow with white or a lighter color of my color scheme. It just kind of brings it out a little bit for that purpose. And the CSS rule that we're working with here is the text shadow style. And typically with the text shadow style here, you have text hyphen shadow, and then in the style sheet you have basically three styles. I'm going to talk about a couple others here in just a second as well. But the first two values is going to help control the offsetting. So you can actually use negative values here. You can say negative 2px, negative 2px, because then it will position it upwards and to the left. If you do positive, it's going to go down and to the right. And so you can use negative values here, and really the key is to kind of experiment depending on the font size, what size of shadow you're going to work with. And then the third control is the color. And so you try to fit with the color scheme. If you're working with blues, then you might want to use a dark blue shadow or a light blue shadow, depending on what type of font color you're working with. So if I take a look at my code here, I simply have some text here called heading 1, and I'm just going to open up. This is what it looks like right now. It's just plain, but I want to see how shadows are going to have be applied to this. So you notice that there's a light blue background and a dark blue text. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm just going to go into my style sheet, and I'm going to add text shadow, and I'm going to offset it 2px, from bottom and right hand side, and I'm going to make it white color. Now this is where you kind of experiment. So if I come back in and I refresh here, you can see there's a light text around it. Just kind of makes it stand out a little bit. And one of the good things about that is that if I want to experiment, then I can offset this, and it doesn't have to be the same too, but I'm going to say, let's say 3 pixels. You can see the offset is going down to the right. Now in theory, you could move it way down, and it's almost like a separate text phrase. And here, this would probably be a little distracting if somebody came in and looked at this. But if you're trying to create a creative design, it's possible that you could do something like that. Now I'm going to go back and change it back up to 2 pixels. And just like a shadow, that is out there, if you go out with the sun and, or from a light source, the farther you're away from that light source, you're going to have more of the edges be more blurry. And if you're closer to the light source, it's going to be of a harder edge. So you can control with add a third value that automatically controls how blurry that shadow is. So if I go in my code and add a third value, I'm going to do 10px this time instead of 2px. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to refresh my page here. So you can see that it has just kind of like a glow around it. So it creates a kind of like an outer glow. And sometimes if you're comfortable working with Photoshop, you have that inner glow, you have that outer glow styles that you can apply. And so what it does here just softens the edges, and that might be too much for what you're trying to do. Okay, but again, you get this control, and if you want a hard edge, then you want to make sure that this is set to a lower value. And so when I do this, it's going to be just a subtle blurriness. You won't see it, but it's just a little more of a hard edge for that purpose. Now this is where you can actually start being a little more creative. is now you can add multiple shadows to the text phrase. So if you want something controlled up on the top left, or if you want to control something different down to the bottom right, you can automatically do so. And this is because CSS3 allows you to control that. The key here is the first set of values has to be separated. Once you're in the color, you have to put a comma in. And then you put in the same three set of values or different values to the right of that. And in theory, what it's going to do is going to apply this first, and it's going to apply this second. Okay, so again, you can apply it. Why would you do something like this? It allows you to be a little more creative when it comes to a website, because if you want to create a design and you want that title to pop out, one way to do it is to add some shadowing. And to really get out work with styling, instead of using hexadecimal values that we have here, this is just a simple hexadecimal value. Almost every book, everybody, when you read about it, they says, hey, choose a hexadecimal value. What I feel is more important to start working with when you're working with shadows, and even you can choose different colors, is to use the RGBA color model. And this is a little more ideal because it gives you that extra dimension to work with. And what is that extra dimension? Opacity. So you can make text and you can make it transparent. And when we work with the RGBA model, what we do is we type in RGBA, and then in parentheses we control the red, the green, the blue values. And then we change the opacity, and you can go from 0 up to the 100%. 100% it's going to be solid, so you will never probably have 100% for that purpose. And so this tells me that this is going to be pretty much white, because there's no values of red, green, and blue. And if it was 255, 255, 255, then we know it's going to be black. If we start incorporating this into our design, we can get something very interesting. So here, a simple shadow I did is I'm offsetting it 2 pixels, 4 pixels, and making it a little slightly blurry, and then I'm going to make the color. I'm going to adjust it and change the opacity. Now I did change the font color here to be white because I want to show you this, and you're going to say, well, what's the difference with this? And I want to refresh this. Okay, if I see the shadow, see how the shadow is just what it's doing, and really it's kind of hard to see, but let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. The shadow is blending with this blue background. So the shadow is not black or gray. It's actually blending in with the blue. So it's some type of blue shade. So it fits with the color scheme that we're working with. Again, you might not think anything about it, but design-wise, that's a neat little trick to do that we're working with. So again, there's different ways to work with this as well. And so if I go in and I want to make, utilize 2 different shadows, okay, so if I go back into what I was talking about before, where I can go in and control one shadow and another one that has to be a little more transparent, it can make an interesting look. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm changing the color back to a different color, darker blue. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the first shadow, I'm going to offset it. Not going to make it blurry. And again, could you leave that empty? You could. But as we know in CSS and styles, it's best to put the value in, because then each browser tries to interpret the code. So if you put the value in, then it knows, hey, 0. And we're going to make that shadow white. So then I'm going to offset the next one. I'm going to make it a little larger. And it's going to go in the same positioning. It's going to go down to the right. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use RGBA, and again I'm going to use the colors, and then I'm going to change the opacity so it's really transparent. Now let's take a look at what this looks like. Notice again how the shadowing, we got one shadow, then we have a third one. That third one, see how it blends in with the blue? So it's taking and bringing in that information. from that color in the background. Now, of course, when I zoom back out, this is what it looks from the end result, but when you zoom in, you can definitely see it. But it's an interesting look, and it kind of almost gives you that feel of working, as you're working with shadows, that you can experiment a little bit more. So maybe you don't like, the offsetting. So let's just do this. Let's go down to 2 and 1, and let's take this down to 7 and 6. And again, it all depends on the font size that you're working with. And you can see that got the white, but maybe that's just not working out. So it's really just kind of going with experimentation for that purpose. Now, you can work with the shadowing to create like an embossed look. You can work with the shadowing to create, these different styles that you see in design. And one of the things is are you restricted to having just 2 shadows? No, you can have 4 sets of, you can have as many shadows as you want as long as you separate by a comma. Now, granted, it gets a little harder to control. Like in this example, this one has the first shadow, okay, and then we have an offset, another offset, and notice that each of these have a couple different transparency alphas, and definitely major offset here for that purpose. So one of the things is that this way they're going down vertically. That's why the 0 pixels. So let's take a look at this. Notice that the shadow here where it says test, see how it's vertically going straight down, so it's a different look. And then notice the shadow around the text. It almost makes it look like a 3D effect, almost like an embossed look. So you can control that all with styling. If you really want a 3D effect for your text, okay, yeah, we could actually create an image in Photoshop, but if you don't have Photoshop, it's not going to work. So and I took this from a tutorial, so I didn't create all these CSS. I took it from a tutorial that's out there for free as well. But in this case, you can do a text shadow, and you can control. And look at this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 shadows have been added. 13. And when I go back and I refresh my page, notice here that the text looks more realistic as a 3D effect. So again, interesting look. And knowing how to work with text shadows is important. One of the things I would suggest doing is starting off learning more about the text shadow, going to W3 Schools, text shadow, learning the basics. And once you learn the basics, then you just start experimenting.